Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a follow-up comment from Angela's presentation. I haven't submitted too many grants. I had submitted a couple early on and for CMHC, and they were all turned down, and I got kind of discouraged. But I did end up, for some odd reason, on a National Science Foundation grant review committee in Washington, D.C., which were reviewing the seed proposals, and these were the first National Science Foundation grants, and they were $4 million grants that were designated specifically for composite teams that had to have an architect on them. And I must say that was the most interesting process I have ever been involved in, and gave me quite a bit of insight, because my job as a reviewer was to go through, I believe we were each assigned about, I think I went through 48-page grants, and my job on this big, huge round table was to pitch the grant. So it had to be written well enough for me to go through and argue it on behalf of the people that wrote it. So it was an interesting inside perspective, because we were sitting around a table with about 24 people, and everybody had to succinctly pitch a grant. And it was almost like a round table whereby you had to vote them down, and somebody had to take notes, and the other person had to pitch, and it was an incredible process of elimination. And then it went to another stage, but a whole bunch of people from all across the U.S., and I was the only Canadian, and some people from Europe were there looking at these grants. So you really had to have it clearly stated and what the objectives were in order for those to have any hope at success. So it's quite an interesting process, and clear writing is absolutely essential. I must say, when I went into teaching, I went into teaching in the worst recession ever, which was in the mid-'80s. And so I was going to become a practicing architect, like all of you probably thought you're going to become a practicing architect, and I came out of school and there were no jobs. We're not talking the current recession where people just aren't getting paid enough. We're talking nothing, no jobs, zero, nada. Everybody graduated from my class, no work. And so I ended up coming back. Larry Richards was the director at the time, and I got invited back to replace Reine Schuster and Am Dutt, who were simultaneously on sabbatical and teaching all the structures courses. So I was invited back as a graduate student who TA'd structures courses because I got A+ in them all the way along. And I was invited back to teach, and so I ended up going to get a master's degree because I was told that I couldn't really have the job I had because I only had a bachelor's degree, so go get a master's degree. Well, that was a big, whacking thesis that I had to write there. But it was a bit of a torture thing. I went into architecture because I liked to design and draw. I did not go into architecture because I liked to write. I always loved to read, but writing was always a bit of torture. But I found when I wanted to become a professor, I thought, well, I'll stick this business out. I'm kind of enjoying the teaching part, but damn, if I want to go up for tenure, I have to have a lot of publications. And that started seriously looking at how do I go about getting publications. And so I would look through all of the newsletters and things to try anything that I could remotely think that I could write about. And so all those first, conferences I would go to, to present, a paper. There's a paper here and a paper there, and some were on building construction, and some of them were on environmental design. And it was never a pleasure. It was always, well, I've got to do this paper because I have to present because I need so many in order to go up for tenure. But what happened, that there was something happened to me when I got involved with the Steel Institute, because I actually found something interesting and something that I could feel really passionate about. And I think you find that when you're working on any kind of a project, that there are projects that you just get through, and there are ones that excite you and you can throw everything into it because you feel passionate about them. And I'm thinking when you're pondering your writing, you have to find out what it is that you feel really passionate about, because that really transformed my writing to the point where these days I can hardly wait till I can carve out that time to sit in front of my computer and write. I really passionately love writing, and I love writing because it has a lot to do with what I'm researching. and my involvement in the steel industry. And a lot of that happened around the mid-2000s, so really not all that long ago, when I started to go on job sites and took my camera and started to take pictures and realized that as an architect who had a good understanding of structures and going onto these job sites and doing my photo documentation, and I would say particularly when I looked at Rom, Leslie Dan, in those two projects in particular, that were all going to have their steel covered up, that what I had captured was something that was going to disappear, and that I realized that I was the only person that knew the story. So I had a specific viewpoint to share that was based on being the only person that had a particular set of photographs and could speak intelligently about them, and also took great advantage of my working relationship with people in the industry and fabricators and engineers in order to ask questions so that I knew my story and my material better, because they were actually so delighted that an architect was interested. In fact, they thought it was kind of comical at first, and I was a bit of a curiosity, and now I've gone from being sort of this curiosity person, this woman that keeps showing up on the site with her camera, to someone that my favorite fabricator will send me an email. I've got a project I need you to photograph in New York. You want to go down to New York and take pictures so that I get paid. I don't get paid extra, but at least I get a trip to New York and stay in a nice hotel, and I get my pictures, and then I've got more material to work with. So it's kind of a rolling ball at this point that's gathered a huge amount of momentum. When I started to work very closely with CISC, the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction, after getting a number of grants from the Steel Structures Education Foundation, and that was where I would have to pitch a grant, and these weren't fancy SSHRC or NSERC grants. These were, put 2 or 3 pages of proposal together and convince us about funding we should give you to create education tools, because that's what they funded. So I've just finished the launch of a Steel Connections website, which has taken quite a bit of time to, again, photo document and put the material together. And so I had a series of grants from the Education Foundation. But when I got involved with the Architects Exposed Structural Steel National Committee, I got to know an awful lot more people, more members, and what became clear as we were doing our roundtable discussions was the formulation for my first book. So you're sitting there and you're going like, I need books. If I want to go up to become a full professor, I need a book. I mean, I've been told I need one of these. You go, well, how do I get one of these? And one of the things that you can't do in my profession, you cannot vanity publish. So I can't say I've got a really great book to write and I'm going to put, $20,000 and I'm going to make this really nice book and I'm going to put it on Lulu and let people buy it and say I've written a book. Doesn't count. Doesn't count worth anything. In fact, it counts against you. Because the idea is if you have to resort to vanity publishing as opposed to something that is peer-reviewed or solicited, it's not worth anything. So you've just really wasted your time. So you have to get to a point in your writing and your experience and your passion where people outside look at you as a source of knowledge and expertise and solicit your work. So as I'm working with the people on the Education Foundation, documenting things like the ROM and Leslie Dan and a bunch of other projects for that work, I'm simultaneously working with the Steel Institute on the AESS work, and I'm sitting there, juggling a whole bunch of balls. I took the work that I was doing documenting things like the ROM and AGO, and those got translated into articles for Canadian Architect magazine, which were nice because they pay 50 cents a word. I find that the big challenge in doing a lot of my work, even though it's not vanity publishing, you're still putting a lot of your own time and effort in for very little return. And as somebody once said to me, unless you're Stephen King, don't expect to be able to just write books and retire when you're in architecture, because the audience is not the same. You're not going to get the bestseller. Even if you're the best-selling architecture book, you still have to go to work every day because those royalty checks are not going to be that big. So I took the work from Canadian Architects, and I get out there, and that I have a website, and so there's my vanity publishing. So every paper I do, everything I publish is all on my website, and I put meta tags and I put keywords on that website. So if anybody searches for things, my stuff comes up. So at the same time, I'm putting together the Architecture Exposed Structural Steel Guide, and I'm doing all these. I'm getting invited to do talks for CISC because they like my pictures, they like my delivery, they think I'm kind of interesting to kind of plunk the architect with the pictures in at conferences. So it was at that point in time that the editor from Burkhauser sent me the email in March 2009 and said, would you like to write a book? And usually you go through your email and most of it's spam or somebody's telling me I've won $1 million or a lottery, and look at this, okay, this is an editor from Burkhauser. Would you like to write a book on steel design, target audience, architects and architecture students? And I'm going like, is this a dream? This is everything that I have been doing all put together in an opportunity. And of course you write back like, sure, I'd love to do that. So that started a really interesting process because I'd never done anything quite like that before. I had never had to negotiate a contract with a publisher. I didn't know what the rules were. And so you're working through all of these little issues, I was just so excited to have a company as large as Burkhauser ask me to do something that a lot of the clauses that I should have looked at in the contract and went, I don't think so. I signed. So I started working on the book, and that's the book. The exciting thing is it got to be in print. It was a lot of work because it was an original contract was for 50,000 words, which for most master's students sounds like an awful lot of words, and about 400 images. So by the time I'd actually finished writing the book, it was 103,000 words, and it was 800 images. And since my contract said the book could be no bigger than 220 pages, and it was supposed to be 2/3 color, and it had to be simultaneously published in German, it came back to me that you have to cut the book down because it physically won't fit in the number of pages that are in your contract. We can modify the formatting to accommodate more words, but if you really want it to be bigger, you have to fundraise for the translation of those 30,000 extra words. So we know we can fit 80,000 words in, and we can probably fit 600 images in, but if you want those extra words, you have to pay for the translation into German. We're not paying for that. So that required fundraising. So it's not like vanity publishing where you're putting money in, you're trying to get other people to give you money that have faith in your book so that you can finish publishing it. Well, you sit there and talk about writing an email to try to ask for money. And so I had to ask for, it was 15,000 euro I had to raise, which is a fair bit of money. So I wrote this very nice pitch about the book, and I sent it off to the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction. So I thought, well, it's a lot of Canadian stuff in here. They should be interested in the fact that their steel's going all over the world. And I sent it to my favorite steel fabricator who had done the ROM, and Leslie Dan, and OCAD, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And it was the most sweet moment in my life was within 2 hours of sending it to my fabricator, I had 10,000 euro. It was like, sure, where do I send the check? So that was a really good affirmation. It took a lot longer to get the Steel Institute to give money, and in fact, head office wouldn't give me any money, but all the regions in Canada, who I had come to know through my talks, through my donated time, and through my travels, came together and said, yeah, we will support that. By the time that book came out, the other one had come out for the ESS guide, which, it's skinny, but it has an ISBN number. And I got to do all the graphics for that one as well, and it's a very, very tight book because they published that one in full color. So everything comes out. It's November 2012 when Architecture Exposed Structural Steel Design, the Understanding Steel Design comes out. And I knew all along that we had financial problems with my publisher. My Burkhauser was owned originally by Springer. Just after I signed my contract, Springer was sold to Actar, which Lola is successfully working for. But what happened with Actar, because they're out of Spain, they essentially took all of the money from Burkhauser sales, paid no Burkhauser bills, and forced Burkhauser into bankruptcy. So after having, and I do have a screen cap that I took on Amazon.com on March the 3rd of 2012, I was the #1 selling book in my education category. I was ahead of Ed Allen's Building Construction Illustrated for like a brief moment. So I screen capped that, and I should print it and frame it. But that was on March 3rd, and then a couple days later, Burkhauser was declared insolvent. That meant that all I have been paid for this book to date is €2,000. All the money that was spent fundraising for the book, my translator received €30,000 to do the translation into German. My graphic designer, who was working for Actar at the time, received nothing for 4 books, yet I had enough of a good rapport with my editor and my graphic designer that he released the files, which he could have held on to, and made it so that my book didn't get published at all. So the book is in print. This was the #1 selling book for Burkhauser Fall 2011 books. So it sold 2,300 copies in 6 months, which they said was incredible sales. And I've received no royalties. One of the things that when you're writing and reading contracts for books, what I was really concerned this is my first real book, I'm so excited. There was a line in there that said, any subsequent editions, that the license for printing the book is exclusive to Burkhauser. And if I don't cooperate with them properly to do changes or subsequent books, then I can be excluded from that and they can get someone else to work on my book. So I was so worried that would happen, that, I'm just signing everything away. Well, what that meant is in the case of a bankruptcy, the rights to my book were left with the publishing company. As an author, I had no rights to my book. So my book was in limbo for a while, in that I couldn't take the book and take it to another publisher. I had friends that I developed with Routledge, because I sometimes actually now read proposals for books for other book companies based on my expertise, and I will decide whether or not other people's books go ahead, whether or not I see duplication in the industry. They send comments to me, so I do that for people like Wiley, Taylor and Francis, Routledge, and some other BRE, British Research Establishment, will ask me for reviews on papers and things like that. So I had a contact at Routledge and said, I can't really touch your book because you don't have the rights to your book. And we can't publish your book while there are still remaindered copies that could be going out for sale for really, really cheap, unless you can get your hands on those copies. So it was really stuck. So I was very lucky when De Gruyter purchased Burkhauser at the end of April. And so hopefully this coming April, I will maybe get a royalty check on whatever sold between, March the 24th and this coming April. So that's a real learning exercise, because I was supposed to have had another €3,500 advance plus 8% on royalties based on 2,300 copies, technically selling at $100 a copy at 8%, which, when you're sitting there ahead of time doing the math, that sounded pretty darn good. One of the things I decided to do with that book, based on the fact that I do my own photographs and talking to colleagues from different places in the States that also write, was to decide to not buy photographs, use my own. So I was actually saved an awful lot of money, considering that there are 600 photos in the book. If I had to pay $100 a piece for photographers' rights, I could have put upwards of $60,000 into buying photographs for the book. So think about that when you're thinking about rights. You either have to get things that are Wikipedia, like public commons, and that takes a lot of work to find those. Flickr now has things that are as soon as you upload to Flickr, they're automatically protected, so you would have to be searching through Flickr just to get the right photograph, and then asking somebody to give their rights, or they may want payment So I went the stock option way. I decided to average down. I decided I wasn't burnt, and I really liked writing, and let's see if we can make this work. Really liked my editor. When I was editing my book, I actually flew to Berlin, stayed with he and his wife in their apartment, and I just sat there and edited my 103,000 words down to 80,000 words. I cut pictures. It was a fabulous thing. So I was a good editor, still working with De Gruyter. So I've got 2 more books coming up that the contract, I just have to mail it back. One on diagrids, which is steel buildings with diagonally, diagonal members to frame them, which I've just finished traveling in anticipation it would go ahead around the world to get all my photographs. I've basically got all my photographs. I'm going to sit at Arup as a visiting scholar during reading week in order to obtain copies of technical diagrams and things for all the projects, which is exciting, and it's supposed to be out. I'm supposed to finish writing this by the end of June. Okay, you guys who are working on master's thesis, I'm going to write an entire book between now and the end of June and teach and go on some travels and have a family of 3 kids and a dog and a husband and a house. So, I mean, I'm very unsympathetic when people can't get their theses done, when they are single people and all they have is a thesis to write, and they have no other responsibilities. So, you got to focus. You pick the topic. You should be passionate about it just right, okay? Otherwise, you should have picked another topic, for heaven's sake. So I've got diagrids going ahead, and that'll be followed by architecturally exposed structural steel, which is going to follow nicely off this book. The other wonderful thing that happened was that the head of the Steel Institute in Canada goes on committees, and he was chatting with people that run the Steel Institutes in Australia and New Zealand, and they liked our system. I was the one who suggested that we needed an illustrated guide because the architects were going to look at those written specs and go, huh? So I said, pictures are worth 1,000 words. So I managed to create this job for myself, and then it ended up being a trip to Australia and New Zealand this past November. I redid the guide for them with their own rules and guidelines and laws, and then toured around, and that was all paid. So that was very exciting, and that was allowing me more travel to get more fodder for subsequent books. So I found a piece of something that I could be really passionate about, and that seems to be very well received, seems to be topical. And one of the reasons that I'm on a tear on getting my diagrid book out and didn't try to negotiate more time, even though the time is really tight, is that I'm hoping it will be the first book out on the topic, and it will have an incredible wealth of photographs you can't find anywhere else, diagrams that I will have worked in from Arup, and that maybe I'll make back some of my losses. I did manage to write the contract better. In case of a bankruptcy, I own the rights to my books. So I'm hoping that if I have that written in, that it won't happen. But of course, you never know. I do encourage you to, go on to Amazon.com. Amazon.ca is still not managed to figure out how to list Burkhauser books for sale because De Gruyter has a different ordering mechanism, so my book is still for sale on Amazon.com and all the other Amazons in the world except my home country, which is, after a while you just don't have the time to waste trying to fix certain problems. But it's just a really exciting and rewarding experience. And I say it's tied to me because I'm passionate about it. I have a very different viewpoint than other people have. I take photographs in a different way. In fact, yesterday, I got a really annoying email. I had entered a couple of my photographs into a steel photo contest, and they emailed me back in the morning that they had disqualified my images because they weren't mine. Okay, I really wasn't there. So you emailed them back, and apparently someone else had lifted my images and put them on their website. So when they did that Google image search with the upload image, and it showed up somewhere else, they just assumed that I'd stolen it. So that was and they said, they're really nice images. I said, thank you very much. Yes, I really did take them. The other people stole them. So, just find your passion and write. And when you read a contract, actually read it. I know it's written in lawyer, and lawyer is really hard for us to swallow as architects, but it's important to protect yourself and then just, really work with it and get your material out there. Thank you.